Hey everyone, let's have a little chat about The Ghosts of Heaven by Marcus Sedgwick. This is a book told in 4 stories. The 4 stories can be read in any order you want. Since you can read them in any order you want, I read them in the order they were printed in the book. So quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4 in that order. And I enjoyed the experience. The experience can also be repeated in different reading order on a reread, and I am not actually sure if I want to reread this. Which doesn't mean I didn't like the book, but I wasn't in love with it. The part that it's 4 different parts also means that we follow 4 different stories with 4 different characters set in 4 different times. And I didn't connect to all the characters in the same way. Quarter 1 is set in a time where cave paintings were made and people believed in magic and that the paintings had an effect on the hunting results. And we get the whole story told in verse, which reads really fast. We mostly follow a young girl who wants to do the cave paintings and be the next person who does the magic. And it's very interesting. I really liked the flow of the story, how it was written, the ideas that were conveyed, but you couldn't really connect and feel with the characters because it was rather short and distant. I don't know. Quarter 2 was about a young woman who basically gets hunted down as a witch. And this was a devastating story. I really connected to the main character. I could feel with her devastation, how hopeless the situation was. And at some point how the whole village conspired against her and there was nothing she could do. She was really powerless and you can feel it in the writing. And I think that was my most favorite story of all. Quarter 3 is mostly told in diary entries and we get the point of view from a doctor who goes into an insane asylum and wants to help and cure people, and his discussions with one patient mostly and the struggles he has with the organizational parts. And although this was an interesting story, I don't really felt connected to the narrator or the doctor who was writing the entries. I was more interested in one of his patients, which was his main interest as well, but you couldn't really get anywhere. So I was left with a lot of questions for this story. Quarter 4 is set in the future and it does have interesting aspects, but I felt so many loose ends that I was a little bit lost. And that sums up most of the book for me. So even though I do like Sedgwick's writing, he's amazing. If you haven't read any of his books, just pick any. They're all really well written. But this one mostly left me without an answer. Spirals are a central part of the story and they're also a central part of how you can read the book. But I didn't get a conclusion or an answer. I feel like I'm left with more questions than answers, which is not a bad thing per se, but I didn't want to have that. I like sometimes to have conclusions and not being confused as to what everything means. And you don't get that here. You have a lot of ways of interpreting what happened, of connecting the 4 parts and seeing connections between them, and that's interesting and that's fun to read. But when you look for connections to the characters, feeling with the characters, or even rooting for a character to do something or get something, achieve something, I didn't really feel that. So I felt a little more distance to the characters than I personally like in books. Which doesn't say that this isn't a good book. It's well written, it's well crafted, and it's well designed, and it also gives you options to think. But for me, it just left me a little bit bland. Since I got this feeling of unanswered questions, I would like to know if you have read the book, if you have answered the questions, what your ideas were of the connections of the stories, the meanings of the spirals, anything. Let's talk in comments. Be aware to warn for spoilers if you give any. And also, if you haven't read the book yet, are you interested and what do you expect from it? Do you want to read it in the published order or do you think of mixing up your reading order? Let's talk about this in comments. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.